the biggest ongoing cost when you have a flock of chickens is their feed. And right now, and for the last few years, chicken feed has just been getting more and more expensive. It seems like every week it's gone up in price. So let's talk about how you can make sure that your chickens are getting the right amount of feed, but not too much, so you can make sure that the money you need to spend to feed your flock is getting you the best value. When we're talking about the bag of feed that you go and buy at the feed store, chickens need about 120 to 140 grams per chicken per day of that feed. And that's the generally accepted number that's been brought out from scientific research and all that kind of stuff. But let's talk about the factors that could change up that number for you, because it's quite dependent on the lifestyle and the breed and lots of other factors in your flock. The first factor that influences how much food your chicken needs is what breed are they. So big chickens are going to need more food. Chickens that lay a lot of eggs are going to need more food, and on the flip side of that, smaller chickens and chickens that don't lay that many eggs aren't going to need as much food. So in my flock, most of my chickens are very, very large, especially my roosters, but they don't lay a huge number of eggs per hen. And obviously no eggs at all if they're roosters. So I generally think that they probably need around the 120 grams of feed per day, because they're not high production hens, but they are big. The other thing that influences how much feed they need is how much activity they get. So how big is your chicken run and how active are your chickens? My flock are pretty active. They're cruising around all day, scratching and doing bits and pieces. But because they're sort of big, heavy breeds, most of them, they don't do any of that activity with a heck of a lot of energy. So some smaller breeds of chickens and just different breeds in general can be a lot more active than the kinds of breeds that I have. They're always moving and flying and flapping and scratching and doing less laying around in the sunshine. So it's really important to sort of know how your flock likes to behave and what their activity levels are. So even if they have a big space that they're ranging around, see how active they actually are in that space. When your chickens are molting, they might eat less feed. I have definitely had the experience that most of my chickens, while they're molting, will eat less of the bagged feed that I give them. But it is important that when they are in that stressed place, which they are when they're molting, that the quality of the food that you're feeding them is really important. So a nice high protein feed for them will help them through that. So feed them as much as they will eat and make sure it's a high quality feed during that time. And also when they're taking a break from laying eggs, they may not need as much feed, but if you think they should be laying eggs, you might want to look at the feed quality, particularly in terms of protein that they're getting, because maybe they're just not getting enough from their diet to feel like they can be laying eggs. How I like to do my feed calculations is by knowing how many days a bag of feed will last me. So at the moment, a 20 kilo bag of feed is lasting my flock 8 days, which means that each of my chickens is eating roughly 100 grams of feed per chicken per day. Now that is a little bit under that 120 that I think that they need. But what I do is I feed my chickens twice a day, so they don't have access to the feed all the time, and I observe how hungry they are, how quickly they eat that feed, if they're leaving any of that feed behind. And I also know what else I might be feeding them in terms of food scraps and things like that. So I like to keep an eye on those factors and adjust how much feed they're getting accordingly. And by doing that, it means that I am not feeding them too much. There's no wastage. If I see that they start to leave feed, particularly in their afternoon feed, if they're leaving it, they're not that interested in it, I know that I can make that feed a little bit smaller. They're always hungry in the morning, so I make sure that their morning feed is bigger, their afternoon feed is smaller, and I adjust as I see their behavior. And this really helps me to save money on feed. In the wintertime, they eat more, and also in the summertime, they can eat more because there's less available for them to forage on. But in the springtime and the autumn, that number can drop to as low as about 75 grams of feed per chicken because they have so much available to them out in the landscape. So all of these things can really help you to shave money off your feed bill, but it's really, really important to make sure that you're watching the behavior and the health and the happiness of your chickens to make sure you don't go too far with cutting your feed costs down. My formula for calculating chicken feed in my flock is to take the number of days that the bag lasts me. So at the moment that is 8 days. How many chickens I have, so right now that's 25 chickens. So I then know that each chicken is getting about 100 grams of feed per day each. Now you can also do this from the other direction. You can work out how many grams of feed you think each chicken needs. So you could say 120 grams, and then you can work out how many days that bag of feed will last you. 120 grams, 25 chickens, that bag of feed will last you just a bit longer than 6.5 days. So you can really make sure you can budget out your feed really well by taking either one of these approaches. In my experience, the quality of the feed that you buy for your chickens really matters. And what I mean by that is I have observed that my chickens generally seem to eat to satisfy their protein and their micronutrient, requirements. So if I give them a low quality feed that is low in protein and probably doesn't have like good quality nutrients packaged into the bag, they will eat more of that feed, potentially more than they need. So if I was giving them a feed that was low in protein, that maybe only had 11% or 12% protein, they would eat that feed well in excess of their calorie requirement, trying to get that protein requirement that they're looking for. So you can actually save money by making sure that the feed that you buy has everything that your chickens need, is a good protein level, and whilst that feed might be more expensive per bag, your chickens very well may eat less of it. And you can assess that by just watching their behavior and their happiness and their hunger levels to ensure that that's actually panning out for you. This feed quality issue can also play out in terms of what forage is available to your flock. So I've already mentioned that the seasons change up how much my chickens need from bagged feed versus what they're finding out in their environment. So if you have chickens that have access to really good quality forage, they may be meeting a lot of their nutrient and protein needs from out on their rangeland. They might be getting lots of bugs, or maybe you have a worm farm and you can give your chickens lots of worms. So if that is the case, then it's possible you can get a feed that is cheaper or lower in protein because their protein and nutrient requirements are being met from elsewhere. But generally speaking, unless you live in the tropics or somewhere like that, you're going to have a big seasonal curve on that. So you can't just do one thing and keep doing it day after day. There is going to be constantly changing environmental conditions that impact what your chickens are able to find on their own. So keep an eye on your chickens' health, how they're looking, how they're behaving, if their feathers are looking good and glossy and healthy, if they're laying eggs and their eggshells are healthy. Look at all of these signs, the behavioral signs, the physical signs, and that will guide you to know that you are feeding your flock well and appropriately. So I hope that you can save some money at the feed store by being organized and watching your flock, and make sure that you're feeding your chickens a good, high protein, healthy diet.